Welcome back. Today we're discussing the second basic emotional need in the Schematherapy series, and that is the basic emotional need for autonomy, competence, and identity. And as a result, when this need is not properly met within someone's upbringing, four dysfunctional schemas can develop. We're going to discuss them today, which are the schemas of dependency, enmeshment, failure, and vulnerability to harm and illness. And before we're going to do that, here you can see different sources of information that I use for this video, because I find it important for you to also know where the information is coming from. So first we have the most, I would say, basic book about schematherapy that is made by the developer of schematherapy, Jeffrey Young. The other book is a book that is written for clients. It is a bit of an older book, but I do think that it gives kind of this nice language in how you can translate the information to clients. And the last one is a proposed paper. Currently, schematherapy is going, I would say it is under revision in a way that there are some new constructs that are currently being researched in a very large worldwide study. And this is one of the first paper where they actually propose this new idea. I will mention them shortly throughout the video, but of course, I think it is better to wait to really dive into it until the information has come out, and I think it is better to hear that from the actually very senior developed schema therapists that are actually working on this. But first, let's dive a bit more into this need. So when you think about what is important for a kid to develop into a healthy adult, the first basic emotional need that we discussed was this need for safety and nurturance and connection. The second one is just as important, I would say, and it is often a bit in competition with this idea of safety and nurturance, where parents much more have the task to kind of make children autonomous, to send them into the world in a safe way, and that a child has the ability to develop their own self-identity. And we talk about self-identity so that a child really understands that they are their own person. It is also about being able to discover all new things and through that develop a sense of safety. It is about forming competence, this idea that you are able to do things. So it is not only about forming this idea about who you are and what you like, but also what you are capable of. So that in the end, as a healthy adult, you are your own person with an identity that you can fall back on also when things are hard. And when we think about what kind of environments might lead to the development of dysfunction in this area, it is often more of a parenting style that is overprotective or over-involved. So this might be parents that deal with anxiety themselves, or who have a very, overly influenced parenting style, where a child really struggles to see that they are their own person. It can also be much more in a family environment that has very clear ideas about what is good and what is wrong, so that this child is kind of forced to form an identity within the views of their parents. And in some cases that might fit seemingly, but with clients who come with issues, you often see that their own identity might have fallen outside of that kind of forced identity. And lastly, it can, of course, also has to do with more abusive and neglectful parenting, where clients kind of don't have guidance, and that because of that, they also don't develop a very strong self-identity. But it is much more the over-parenting, I would say. And when we talk about this proposed paper, they actually say this need is about developing a sense of being able to make independent choices, discovering the world, being able to overcome problems, and forming a sense of identity. So it is really autonomy, competence, and identity. I think if you remember those three words about this basic emotional need, it is almost enough, I would say. So when a child grows up in an environment like this, 4 different types of dysfunctional schemas can develop. We have the schema of dependency, the schema of enmeshment, the schema of failure, and the schema of vulnerability to harm and illness. And from now on, we're going to go through all these 4 schemas one by one. And the first one is the schema of dependency. And this is really this idea, more in a practical sense, that you are unable to handle daily tasks without help of others. The young schema questionnaires, you see items like this. Like, I do not feel capable of getting on by my own in my daily life. I think of myself as a dependent person when it comes to everyday function. That is like the reversed item. I lack common sense. My judgment cannot be counted on. And I don't feel confident about my ability to solve everyday problems. So this is really about practical function in everyday life. So how does this schema develop? So we have two ways of how this schema can develop. And the largest way is the way of overprotective parenting. And overprotection can look like a lot of different things. I think the most common one is parents who kind of take over most tasks, don't try to make their children autonomous or give them age-appropriate tasks, might help with every homework or even do the homework for the kids. It can also be that parents have anxiety issues themselves, so that they're much more about like, look out, or don't go there because there is danger, or like, make sure you do this, this, and this, so that really children also grow up with this idea that they are apparently not able to handle difficult situations. It can also be that parents kind of give overly advice for every decision, or like really describe every step of the way, so that a child don't really develop that sense of doing that themselves. And it can also be that parents kind of grow up in, now I must say that different, that a child grows up where they might feel that their sense of self is not really aligned with their parents, but the parents are critical of everything that is outside of how they view the world. So the other way is the way of underprotection. So where children kind of are forced to be independent on a very young age, they don't really learn how to do that. So they might learn how to take all these adult decisions, but they still feel like a child on the inside. And so this might look as if someone is able to be independent, but on the inside they don't feel that at all. And that is much more the underprotection side. So we talked earlier about what a schema activation is. Namely, it is these beliefs that get activated, but also the bodily sensations, the emotions, and the whole memory network. So all the memories that someone has where their parents might have been overprotective or underprotective get activated as well. All of that together is the schema. And when we talk about how does someone behave to the schema activation, those are called modes. And within Schematherapy, we broadly divide them into three categories. Namely, you behave as if the schema is true. You want to avoid the schema, I must make a cross, or you kind of act as if the opposite is true. That is more the Uno reverse. So when someone behaves as if this schema is true, this idea that you are unable to do daily tasks for yourself and that you really have to rely on others, the behaviors will look like that. So someone might ask for reassurance a lot, or kind of puts the responsibility for decisions on others, might choose a partner that is very, I would say, almost overprotective, or is very strong, so they kind of take the leader role and someone can really kind of hang into their dependency. It can also mean that someone just kind of avoids tasks where they have certain responsibility. With avoidance, it is also much more about kind of avoiding being in situations where you might have to take adult responsibility. So you might procrastinate a lot on making decisions, or for example, you don't want a job where you have certain responsibilities, or you don't want to live on your own. And with the Uno reverse, so much more the overcompensating, when someone behaves as if the opposite is true, it's much more the overly self-reliance, the hyper-individuality, like not choosing to rely on others even though it would make sense in the context. So this is much more the I can do it all by myself type of behaviors. Here you can see an overview of how it is proposed within the new paper. I'm not going to go into depth right now, but you can pause it if you want, and you can kind of see what we described just now but it is in a much more detailed way, and they are really trying to make a better connection between certain modes and the original schemas. Because interestingly, if this is the first video you watch, is that the modes kind of became later into schematherapy. By now it is often called schema mode therapy, but schematherapy started with mostly the schemas as the base. Then we have the schema of failure. And this is kind of this generalized idea that you are less competent than peers or colleagues and that you will eventually fail. Maybe you already feel like you failed, or it will happen tomorrow. And this generalized idea of you being incompetent and a failure is measured with the Young Schema questionnaire on these items, such as almost nothing I do is as good as other people, I'm not as talented or intelligent as other people, I'm incompetent when it comes to achievement, and most other people are much more capable as me. And again, when this schema is activated, it's not only these beliefs, but also the emotions, often as kind of this, it can be more shame or anxiety, or really this sense of emptiness, like I can't do it, bodily sensations, and also the whole memory network. How does the schema of failure develop? There are a lot of different ways how this schema can develop, and you see them here. I think the most common ways is when a child grows up in an environment where they really feel that they perform less than, for example, their brothers or sisters, their peers in school, or their parents. Another one is that parents are highly critical. So like the demands are here and you might perform here, which is still normal. But if you grow up with parents who are highly critical of you, then you kind of develop this sense of failure a lot. It can also be that you are being compared to your siblings, or in school being compared a lot to like other peers. Another way that is a bit, I would say, less straightforward is when parents don't care a lot about success or achievements themselves, and therefore they might not learn you discipline, might not learn you how to do your homework, might not learn you how to do delayed gratification. So you not learn the skills that are kind of the opposite of becoming a failure. Like the skills that you have to develop to feel like a competent person might not be learned or modeled by your parents. And the last one is that you sometimes see it also with children who grew up where they had a characteristic that was very different from others. For example, people with an immigrant background, or where they were poor or less educated, that really can develop this idea of that they are a failure. So then, when the schema is activated, how does someone behaves? If someone kind of behaves as if the schema is true, they will often compare themselves a lot to other people and place themselves under the other person. Another one is kind of, if you already assume that you're gonna fail, you might not start to do things. You might kind of be like, I can't do it. So you might not go after a job opportunity, or you might not go after a career or something that a certain hobby that you wanna pursue. You might not do it at all. When we talk about avoidance, it kind of looks a bit the same, but this is often also really the procrastinating and to kind of avoid getting tasked where you might be able to fail. So I feel like there is kind of an overlap when it is much more about surrendering to the schema and avoiding it, because in both situations, someone often already gives up. Then we have the category of the overcompensation. And I find this, especially with this schema, a very important one to discuss, because this is often what you see in the therapy room. So with the other two, someone might really come with this idea that, hey, I feel like a failure. With the overcompensating, it might not be that they kind of start with that. They might be unaware that they actually feel like such a failure, because the behavior that they learned to deal with the schema is the overcompensating. So the winner mentality, so the overachiever. So someone might be highly successful in all kinds of situations. They might go after their dreams, go after their goals. So you won't really see that they have this sense of failure, or they aren't aware of that themselves yet. They just know that they go after their dreams, but they might struggle with anxiety, depression, exhaustion. So this is really often this overcompensating in a perfectionistic kind of way. And here you can also see how it is proposed in the new model. It looks often the same. What they added is in the overcompensation, this idea of more the clown. So you're not overcompensation by working and being like a winner and like going after your dreams and achieving a lot. It is much more about dismissing the idea that achievements matter. So it is much more this idea like, oh, it doesn't matter at all. A career doesn't matter. Achieving things doesn't matter. So that you don't have to feel that sense of failure. Interesting to see. Then we go to the third schema within this basic emotional need, and this is the vulnerability for harm or illness. And in general, it is this idea that the world is a dangerous place and that a disaster can take place every moment. So this is really that heightened level of, I would say, feeling unsafe. And from what I've seen also in clients with more PTSD kind of issues, this is often one that is heightened. And the items that are in the Young Schema questionnaire that measure this one is, I can't shake this feeling that something horrible is about to happen. I'm scared that I will be attacked on the street. I'm scared that a disaster, financial-wise, medical-wise, criminal-wise, can happen at any moment. I worry that I will lose all my money and become homeless. I am worried that I have a serious illness, even though my doctor hasn't found anything. So it is really about, I would say, this heightened sense of threat. So how does this schema develop? There are several ways in which this schema can develop. Logically, it is the development when your parents have this schema. So if your parents really are scared in this world or have anxiety issues or really are over protective of you, you kind of learn that the world is a very scary environment and that you have to watch where you go very carefully. It can also be that the other way of the underprotective parenting. So if you grow up in a house with abuse or neglect, you could say that the house is on fire. And a child really learns that not only the house is on fire, the world is on fire. It's this idea that what happens within the home, the sense of unsafety, that kind of translates to the complete world. And it has to do with, of course, if a client has gone through kind of these very impactful things, such as losing their home or being very poor or going to all kind of natural disasters, it makes sense that this schema also develops. So I find that this schema is often kind of linked to what you see with the hyperarousal kind of ideas in all kind of trauma clients. And when this schema is activated, again, it is not only the beliefs, it is also the emotions, bodily sensations, and the whole memory network is how someone behaves can be divided into, again, someone responds as if the schema is true. So they really feel like that the world is a dangerous place. So that might look as someone worrying a lot, like ruminating about small things, large things, constantly ruminating, but also preparing for all these things, that you might feel that you have to prepare for all kind of disasters. You might ask a lot of reassurance. You might be around people, so you might feel more attraction towards a partner or friends who also have this idea. When it comes to avoidance, it is much more the typical avoidance you see in all kind of clients with anxiety issues. So avoiding possible triggers, but it can also be broader in a phobia kind of way, that there are like all large spaces or crowded places, or for example, the bus, the train, all kind of situations that are being avoided. And the last one is more the overcompensator. Interestingly, in the new model, they mostly talk about the daredevil variant. Makes sense. Like if you behave as if the opposite is true, you act as if there is no danger. So you might perform very risky things. You might do things that other people would consider as kind of a daredevil. In the original one, they also had this category of more the OCD type of behaviors. So kind of the magical thinking and making sure that you perform all kind of rituals to enhance this idea of safety. I wouldn't be surprised if that is something that flips more to the avoidance and surrender type of coping. I don't know if you see the daredevil a lot. It could be more with clients, for example, that perform risky behaviors. Like hypersexuality or something, but or like driving very hard in the streets, excessive drug use. But I don't know if it is always very linked to this schema. But if you have other experiences, let me know. I think from my own practices, what we often see is much more that people actually behave as if the schema is true. So they come with a large list of things that they actually avoid or are scared of. Then we go to the last schema of this domain, and that is the schema of enmeshment. And you see me making this kind of gesture. I find that this actually kind of describes the whole schema, because it is normal when you attach that there is some overlap, but you also have your own person. With enmeshment, people become really entangled. And this is this idea of hyper involvement with often the parents or the partners, and this constant search for support from close ones. And the items that measure this schema are things like, I've not been able to separate myself from my parents in the way that my peers or people my age have been seem to do. My parents and I tend to be over involved. I often feel guilty or betrayed if I don't share my intimate details with my parents or my partner. I often feel as if my parents are living through me, that they don't have a life of their own. And I often feel as if my parents are overly involved. Interestingly, it depends a bit on where someone is on their journey, that sometimes this enmeshment is not experienced by the client themselves as harmful or dysfunctional yet. They might really like it. But this is kind of this idea of enmeshment. And how does this schema develop? In general, there is a lack of boundaries. When you think about this, there aren't enough boundaries, and that can develop in several ways. The most common one is the one of parentification, and you see this so often linked towards each other. Parentification is this idea that a child kind of takes on the role of their parent, and this can be because the parent has been physically ill. This can be because there is an emotional immaturity by the parents, so the child kind of becomes this best friend or therapist for the parent. It can also be that it was much more about you having to take care of your siblings or having to take care of the household. And the difference is, like, it is okay for some children when they are older to help in the household, but it is really about having that responsibility, that if you don't do it, you see that there are issues with your parents. It can also be that the parents have been overly protective, or this idea that they have an idea about how the world is, and you grow up in that, and the things outside of that are being dismissed or seen as threatening. Boundary issues. And how does it look when the schema is activated? So when the schema is activated, it can be these beliefs, but you often see this sense of unsafety, guilt. The whole memory network becomes activated, where a child might remember all the times that they felt very guilty for their parents, or where they have to help their parents, or that their parents became angry when they showed individuality, difficult English word. And how someone responds to that, that is kind of the modes of schematherapy. So when someone acts as if the schema is true, you actually see someone kind of choosing this hyper involvement. So this might mean that they call their parents a lot, they ask, they overshare kind of every detail automatically with parents or partner. You often see that If you grew up in this environment, you also do this with later partners or maybe friends, kind of imitating the behaviors of the enmeshed others and really wanting to be close to that other person. With avoidance, it is much more about choosing people that are also like to be enmeshed with you. Can be friends, can be colleagues, can be partners. And the overcompensating, so someone behaves as if the opposite is true, is much more the hyper-individuality. So someone might kind of act as if they don't need someone else, they don't want to be leaning on someone else, or even when it would be healthy, or they kind of form their identity based on, I don't need anyone. That is the schema of enmeshment. And when I started with Schematherapy, I sometimes found it a bit difficult to see the difference between enmeshment and more dependency. But I feel like it is, I would say that enmeshment is much more even on the emotional competent, and really like this idea that your identity is also like you're literally almost one person. And with dependency, it's much more about practical, being able to kind of care for yourself. And there are people who are very enmeshed who might still have that practical kind of base, but of course there's often an overlap in these schemas as well. In general, you see, just as with the first domain, that when one of these schema is heightened, you often see that others are heightened as well. So that are the 4 schemas within this domain. A very important domain as well, and I think you will see that a lot of clients also come with issues that are linked to this domain. And we talk mostly about dysfunctional schemas, but interestingly, and I find this a very nice development, is that there is more research going on towards positive schemas. And it is important to know that it is not like a continuum where on one end you would say this is the dysfunctional schema and here you have the functional. It is kind of this idea that there is correlation between the constructs, but they are separate things. And when it comes to this domain, you here have the 4, I would say, positive schemas is healthy self-reliance or competence. I think of myself as an independent, self-reliant person when it comes to everyday functioning. You have the healthy boundaries or developed self. I've been able to establish my own life and I'm not overly involved with my parents and their problems. The schema of success, I am as capable as most other people. And basic healthy and safety optimism is I generally feel safe and secure that nothing bad is going to happen to me overly, I would say. And here you can kind of see the correlation with, I would say, their theoretically counterpart. So for some it is quite high, so success and failure is 0.7, the others are around 0.6. So there is some, like you would say that they correlate, but there are also really separate things. And more research is being done right now to the positive schemas. In general, the schematherapy field is very, I would say, evolving, or you might say that, I don't know if it is necessarily evolving. I see it much more as if the roots are kind of becoming stronger because of all this new research. And I think it's a very interesting time also to be a schematherapist. I'm gonna end this video with thanking you for watching. And if you have any questions, let me know. Bye!